I'm going to be referencing quite a lot of material today and sources as I'm going to be charting the role of technology in Indigenous language revitalization. The title of the talk is Technology in Relation, Digital and Online Self-Determination in Indigenous Language Revitalization. And just an overview of what I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to be positioning myself, first of all, as a learner researcher, as if we are exploring the relationship with technology, then it's fundamental to know who we are and also who is enacting the technology. I'll then start with an introduction to this review, the role of technology in language revitalization, by situating the Web 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0 eras. I'll give some examples of technology use in the Web 1.0 era with some key takeaways and insights. I'll then look at the present day Web 2.0 and 3.0 eras with some key takeaways and insights. And then I'll round off this discussion today with some concluding remarks and looking at the future of decolonizing technology. And what I mean by that is technology in relation. So, who am I? Is Misha Meighan Chiblo, she Gaela Hanum, Hamia Glasgow, Auna Alaba, she Ransachura Hanum, Auna McGill University, Montreal, Isma Ur Konyuchug. So what I just said to you is in my language, Scottish Gaelic. My name is Meighan Chiblo. I'm a Scottish Gael from Glasgow, Scotland, and I'm a PhD candidate in Educational Studies at McGill University in Montreal, and it's very nice to be talking with you all today. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge this land, the plants, water, animals, and spirits. I pay respect to the original stewards of this land, Lenape Hoking, the Lenape homeland, which is now home to many Indigenous peoples and communities. I'd like to say I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to present here and to be on this land today. So some reasons for my research. First of all, it's based and rooted in personal experiences as a Gael. Growing up in Glasgow, Scotland, I immigrated here 5 years ago. In Scotland, however, growing up, Gaelic wasn't available to me in the educational system. The only languages I could learn were French, Spanish, Italian, let's say, and I can speak those now. I can speak those languages. However, I can't speak my own language. So I'm now in a process of reclaiming my own language as well. And members of my family and older generations recall being beaten for speaking Gaelic in school. I've also learned from my Anishinaabe family. After meeting and marrying my Anishinaabe husband in Glasgow, Scotland 5 years ago, I've learned more about the devastating impacts of colonization on Indigenous peoples and languages of Turtle Island, or what is now known as North and Central America. So this has driven me to look at ways in which we can enact more equitable education and language policy, and my research focuses on Indigenous language revitalization and decolonizing language education, language and cultural reclamation. So, the advance of dominant colonial worldviews and languages, Indigenous languages continue to be threatened and endangered. Resources are often lacking, such as a lack of trained and/or proficient speakers in the languages themselves. And external, quote-unquote, standards or Western pedagogies may not meet the needs of the local communities themselves. And one common goal for Indigenous language revitalization initiatives is, of course, to promote intergenerational language transmission in the home and in conversational knowledge with each other in those environments as well. So my question here is, could the use of technology be useful or helpful in these contexts? But first of all, before we even look at that or answer that big question, is how do we define technology and its role? And so there's been some interesting talks, and Siva's talk last night as well, talking and touching upon technology and also the insidiousness of technology. So it's important to unpack really what is technology and what is its role. So technology is not just machines, of course. Technology is a result of practical applied knowledge, skills, networks that are ever evolving, fluid, and context dependent. So I'm hearing a lot of recurring themes here about the importance of context so far as well. The main takeaway here is technology, of course, is not neutral and is the extension of the knowledge or belief system which has led to its creation. So examples of technology include writing systems such as pictographs, the pencil, the wampum belt, mass media and television, and more recently, I'm going to be focusing on digital and online technologies, such as the internet and cell phones, which we all have with us today. However, the fundamental point here for the role of technology in Indigenous language revitalization is, and more broadly, which or whose knowledge system is being enacted, who created the website or the app, what is its purpose, how is the data being stored or shared online. It's crucial for Indigenous languages and cultures that have been disprivileged and disenfranchised by imperialistic, capitalistic, and/or colonial knowledge systems to understand these questions before any enactment of technology in the process. So this presentation, therefore, aims to synthesize some of the key takeaways on the role of digital and online technologies since the inauguration of the World Wide Web in 1989. So even in the past 3 decades, there has been so much going on. So this presentation is non-exhaustive. The context and discussion largely focus on the rapidly evolving landscape and proliferation of digital and online technologies. I'd just like to touch on the methods again, just falling back on to my positionality as a researcher. Academic and grey literature, such as reports, policy literature, and government documents were consulted, as well as additional sources such as websites and online newspapers. I took this approach as a decolonizing approach, informed by Indigenous research methodologies and epistemological frameworks. What I mean by this is it decenters search results determined by colonial or Western library knowledge organization systems or algorithms alone. And so how did I do that? Well, citation and reference list snowballing. You source the authors, you go to Indigenous authors, scholars, for example, you look at who they're citing. There's a wealth of knowledge there of scholars that have already spoken to this for decades. So I use the citation and reference list snowballing approach as opposed to going online, typing into Google, and then seeing what it comes at there, because that, as we've been hearing so far, is algorithmic. So I'm looking to how we can decolonize that in terms of where is the knowledge coming from and how and where are we accessing it. So the influence of the dominant Western capitalistic worldview in the World Wide Web in 1989 is clear. Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, envisaged universality and dictated the monolingual, i.e. English design of the web. However, the web is not monolithic or linear and is still evolving. So I'm looking at this in terms of the notions of Web 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0, although they're important when we're looking at, let's say, the political economy of the web, they do have limitations, of course, and are cultural constructs influenced by Western business rhetoric. I stress that the relationship and the evolution of technology is crucial for a more holistic and nuanced assessment of technology's social impact on Indigenous language revitalization. And we could look at this also in more broader impacts as well in terms of the continually evolving internet or the web is complex. It's a social technical environment with multiple uses depending on the social context and the relationships that the users have. So, like I said to you before, the purpose of this is to track over the past 3 decades what developments there have been in technology's social role, what these trends signify for a decolonized, more than Western, Eurocentric, ethnocentric digital landscape and future. So I'll just give some examples here. From 1989 to 2005, the World Wide Web and digital technologies such as desktop computer and CD-ROM came into play. And one of the first Indigenous language revitalization initiatives was Te Wahapu, or the Estuary. And this was a computer-based communication system created in 1990, focused on the revitalization of Maori. And quoting Benton here, this communication system symbolizes the integration of high technology with Maori concerns and interests, and crucially, it conveys a message that English no longer has a monopoly when making use of advanced technology. Another example is Loki, Powerful Voice, an electronic bulletin system established in 1993, entirely in Hawaiian, and provided online support for the Hawaiian language used in immersion schools and the broader community. This facilitated the creation of materials which were both culturally responsive and in the Indigenous language. So there were also spoken and written dictionaries, audio-video recordings of elders speaking the language, and First Nations is an example of how technology has been used by First Nation communities in Canada to document, archive, and learn Indigenous languages using a variety of means such as text, sound, and video clips. And users to this day can interact on this site, which includes an archive, chat facility, games, storybooks, and more. So interactive CD-ROMs and other types of multimedia, and I won't go through all of these because I'm conscious of time here, but these are just some examples of technology. There are CD-ROMs, Scottish Gaelic, Ojibwe, hockey, etc., etc. Some key takeaways: cut out the middle audience. Information, though, in this era was largely placed online by a group, state, without the broader impact of the community, and there was a lack of knowledge co-creation. And also, the majority of these were actually, Buzzard-Welcher only found that 4 of these were created by a quote-unquote tribal member or an official organization. So you can see here, there was really not much co-creation of knowledge. So, and there was also a lack of cultural context or a literal or faithful translation. So just skip forward to Web 2.0. Here, though, however, in the present day, it's more increased user participation, Wikipedia, social media, Facebook, YouTube, and you can see here there was, well, some people say there's a decentralization, localization, and democratization of power. Now, what this has meant for Indigenous languages is there are more informal, formal, and self-directed language and cultural learning opportunities, such as sharing information about land-based planning opportunities, such as fishing, hunting. The Inuit Knowledge Wiki app has come out. The Eotoro application stores traditional botanical knowledge in the language, and the crucial point here, it connected the youth and the elders to promote knowledge transmission, not just language revitalization. So it was more collaborative, multimodal, and I'll give some examples here. I won't go through them all, but you can see here there are many examples of this. So we went from being recipients, Indigenous communities went from being recipients of information to also being creators, having more control, self-determination, and this is crucial to decolonize the digital landscape and ensure that Indigenous voices and worldviews are represented and privileged online in a culturally relevant way. There was movies, video games, social media. Now, this is a big point, and this enabled social media for cultural and community cultural knowledge. So events, memes, snippets of language, and sharing stories and videos online as part of Facebook groups, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. And here's an interesting quote: Indigenous youth can connect, affirm, and give voice to their own identities, cultural and linguistic, which have not been imagined or set by outsiders. Coding has become more prominent as well. Digital archives have become more prominent. And just briefly looking into the future here a little bit, or the present day, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and virtual reality technologies are also being worked on as we speak. And Aboriginal territories in cyberspace in Concordia, Ogoki learning, virtual reality apps in Indigenous languages, Buffalo tongue. There was a movie, Betaban First Flight, a virtual reality movie. And Te Heku Media created the first speech-to-text algorithm in Te Reo Maori from Indigenous language data and cultural protocols. So we can see here, it depends on who is yielding the technology, whose worldview is represented, whose worldview is privileged. And also, Huaki is an AR prototype of an Indigenous language image recognition app with geolocation, which allows the user to take a photo of an object and learn the word for it. And here's a little table just synthesizing all of these examples. So some key takeaways and insights: dramatically more inexpensive, digital divide begins to narrow, and Indigenous peoples crucially no longer need to rely on governmental or external funding to start projects, as they can be started from within the home community on their own cell phones. Also counteracting negative and Western or colonial stereotypes which view Indigenous peoples as being confined to a very specific place, time, and land. Stereotypes like this perpetuate a museological context, broad stroke Indigenous peoples into false dichotomies, such as traditional as opposed to modern, and facilitate a Western, technologically developed exploitation and conquest of the digital world. Like touching on, just coming to wrap this all up, these examples are Indigenous peoples decolonizing the digital landscape and are breaking algorithmic, linguistic, and technological colonization. And they are not under-resourced because Bird confirms here this would be a colonizing frame and assumes that major Western languages are standard bearers and that Indigenous languages need standard technologies. So might not need to have Siri or Alexa or anything like that because language revitalization depends on the context again, and a digital app may represent an access point for one participant and a marker of recognition in a digital realm for another. And the latter is no less significant given that prestige is a factor in language shift. So more research needs to be carried out by or with Indigenous peoples on how Indigenous peoples view and use technology, what purpose this serves or has served, and whether or not this impacts on language usage and promotion of cultural identity. And I'll just move forward here. Technology-enabled and community-determined language revitalization could assist in this process by moving beyond Western learning objectives and embodying the cultural, historical, ecological, and spiritual context underlie the way a community defines its language. And I'd just like to stress here that technology-enabled and self-determined language revitalization initiatives have been centering community needs, not externally defined or set goals such as grammatical fluency or digitally thriving status. And I'll just move forward here to some concluding remarks. The role of technology in language revitalization for Indigenous languages has grown and evolved in a short space of time from a dominant extension of Western hegemonies to one in which Indigenous peoples have an active and important voice in how technology is envisaged and created. And Indigenous creators and developments are firm in applying Indigenous thought and practice. And again, the worldview, the relationship here is fundamental. You can see here, there's some other things, but I just want to move forward. This presentation demonstrates that there are very promising indicators of Indigenous social technological self-determination. Indigenous content creators, developers, and visionaries are becoming increasingly visible and influential in decolonizing the digital landscape to better serve Indigenous peoples, their languages, and their communities. Tapalaith, thank you very much.